10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I have been on a long hiatus. This is Micah McCurry Live number 30. Been just about incommunicado for the last little while here, but 2 months later, better late than never, back with Micah McCurry Live number 30 with Stephen Becker. I was just laughing for just a moment ago that in college, I don't know, Stephen, if we said more than, 15, 20 words to each other besides hi and bye and things like that, past each other in the halls. But some mentioning of all the guys we went to school with, you're one of the, you maybe sound morbid, but one of the few that's doing something like, going all out for God. And I appreciate that. So without further ado, could you 50 to 100 words or so, give us an intro to who you are, what you do?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. Grew up in a church all my life. Attended the church that I'm now the pastor of. Of course, went to Golden State Baptist College and went to pastor a church 5 years and merged with my home church. And so been doing that for about 5 years now, and happily married my wife. We got 3 kids, and so busy life and ministry, but also family as well. So in a nutshell, that's kind of comes to who I am.
So, and my thing, I just bumped a button here, so I just lost the last 10 seconds of what you said.
Okay.
You said happily married, my wife. For all the people that are watching could actually hear that, I apologize. But happily married, and then what was after that?
Oh, I said to my wife, and then we have 3 kids.
Awesome.
4, 2, and 10 months, so all kind of right there.
Yeah, so
and
you are, well, we'll see what the Lord provides, but you are just about 2 years ahead of the curve on us. My oldest daughter turns 2 today, and so I had the great joy of putting together one of those little big wheels, which they're awesome, except for when you're following directions. And I was following the directions, and then I go to put this piece on, hammer it in, has one of those locking nuts or whatever washers, and I didn't put the wheel on. Like, I put the thing that holds it on, and didn't put the wheel on. So I'm an idiot, and so I was a little, talking under my breath, saying complimentary things about myself, got that off and got it fixed. But it's upstairs hiding. So when we're done, we're going to have a little birthday thing. Awesome. But I think she jumped straight into, she's been very well behaved for the most part. I think she jumped straight into terrible 2s today. She's had a rough day today, but that's how it goes. But 4, 2, and 10 months, you said?
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. So you have been the pastor of, you've been a pastor for how long then?
So 5.5 years.
5.5 years. Okay.
Yeah. After graduating, came to the church that I became the pastor of, but there was a 6-month time that they gave us to, there was a man there that was filling in the pulpit, and he was retired. And so they said, for 6 months, we'll just let you kind of get settled and sit and get kind of acclimated to our people, which at first I thought was, I was a little frustrated with it because I thought I just want to kind of get into it. But on the other side, it was very helpful just to kind of get locked in. And I had to work in the beginning as well, actually, until last year. And so kind of get settled with, a side job and, our new home and just, all the changes that all brings. So 2014, January 5th was the day that I became the pastor of First Baptist Church in Loomis. And then, of course, January 2019, this year, is when we merged with Regency and now combined Regency Baptist Church. So
very cool. So I've talked to some different people about this, not necessarily on this program, I don't think. But a lot of the guys that taught us in school, Mike Johnson, Mike Ray, a lot of these guys, I know not all of them, but it seemed like the story from a lot of those guys who graduated from Hiles back in the day, they were going gung-ho. And so many of them, it seems like, jumped straight into the pastorate. A lot of them did. Not all of them, of course. I mean, my boss graduated from Hiles around the same time as those guys, Pastor Grimaldi. He didn't. He was an assistant pastor for a while first. But these days, I would say, maybe I'm wrong, but what's your thoughts on, would you say you're an oddity these days in that going almost straight into the pastorate? Do you know many guys that have done that?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a little more unusual and just, I don't know if there's a specific reason for it.
Sure.
obviously God's will is individual for each person.
Sure.
Um, I definitely wasn't expecting it, wasn't looking for it,
Sure.
was kind of floored by it. I mean, that was literally the bottom, of the list that I was kind of imagining for, what God had for my life. But yeah, it definitely is more rare. I mean, every like pastor's fellowship or conference or meeting that I go to, I mean, even still, I'm the youngest,
Right. Right.
in every regard, which uh, at first was very awkward, and I felt very out of place, which I still kind of do, and that's um, a little bit maybe my personality, but also just because of an age gap, if you
Right.
will.
Right.
But in our area, actually, there is a lot more younger pastors right now. Now I say younger, more like 30s.
Okay.
I'm still not quite there,
Sure.
but we have several in our area now that are kind of 30s pastors. In fact, I had breakfast with a few of them yesterday. Um,
Awesome.
but I would say it's a little more unique. Um,
Right.
I I had pastors tell me do what God wants, but give it a lot of prayer, give it a lot of thought. And these are from men who did that. So I don't know if it was kind of, I don't want to say a warning, but just, make sure And
Right.
of course, we knew that this is where God wanted us and, what he wants, which that in the end is the main thing.
Right.
So
I mean, so and not that we are probably the people to wax eloquent about what those reasons are. I would say probably bluntly, there's not many guys, unfortunately, coming out of Bible colleges. And I'll be blunt to speak for the two that I went to, Golden State and Providence. Looking around my classmates, there weren't many guys that I would say, "Oh yeah, he's ready to pastor right now." And I'll be honest. I mean, you and a few of the other guys, when I heard that you would becoming a pastor, I can't remember if you graduated 1 year before me or right at the same time, because I went and get my master's at Providence right after that,
okay.
and so we kind of lost touch, right? At least geographically, at least. Um, and so it didn't necessarily surprise me, for me, because I was like, okay, I could see that. There are other names I won't mention that it would have surprised me greatly. But unfortunately, there's a lot of guys that looking at him, you're like, well, we need to, and for me too. I mean, I would say, the 5 years I've spent here as an associate pastor, I can't imagine. I mean, I know the mistakes I've made as an assistant pastor. I'd be hard pressed to imagine all the mistakes I would have made as a senior pastor as well. For you, and it's cool. I mean, you started young enough. You're going to be, by seniority at least, you're going to be a pastor for longer than a lot of other guys.
Yeah.
But what were some of the struggles in those first years, being a very young pastor, that you faced pastoring the majority of people that were older than you?
So, especially to our church that we came to, the church that voted us in, I was 21 when they voted us in,
Mm-hmm.
and 22 when I became the pastor. So, and I'll say this, I'm so thankful the Lord called me to the pastorate, but it was a very overwhelming feeling, which if I came into it thinking I had it all together and I still don't, that would have been a problem. And so obviously that was just the Lord, when you have that, obviously your dependence goes to the Lord because you realize that you fall short. But especially pastoring to those that, Pastor Ebert told me when I met with him a couple of times, he said, remember that a lot of your members have probably been saved longer than you've been alive.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said that, it kind of put it in perspective. But, the Bible says, let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example. And one thing I determined in those first couple of years was, I don't have experience to offer. I don't have, a lifetime of, marriage or, parenting or those things. But if I'm an example in soul winning, if I'm an example in, my walk with God and, loving people and, standing for, the Bible and what's right, as God did for Joshua, he lifted him up in the eyes of the people. And God gave me that passage, especially in our first time that we came, because I was so overwhelmed. God told Joshua, as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. And I imagine Joshua filling in Moses' shoes, felt, Lord, man, I'm I'm filling in some big shoes. How do I do this? And God gave him that promise.
Right.
I'm the same God that empowered Moses, and so I'm the same God that can, give you the equipping and whatever it is. And so, the struggles were definitely less people came to us for counsel. They loved, the preaching and, seeing souls saved and people bus ministry through a van route at first, and all those things, were encouraged by it, but very little, like, would come to me or my wife or whoever and say, hey, can you pray with me about this, or can you talk to us about this, or whatever, which I totally understand. And
Sure.
there's a lot of counsel given just in preaching, and so I tried to do that, but the difficulty was more of just probably me than really what it was with our church and with our people. It was God, building me and growing me, and making me the man that he wanted me to be for this position. It doesn't matter who the person is. God has a will in mind that he wants to do for people and for for the gospel. And obviously, if we can be a vessel for that, it doesn't matter who it is.
Right.
But one thing that helped me, especially early on, was the fact that we came into a church that wasn't very established in the regard of, it wasn't a big ministry. We had 18 people vote us in. It's a church that has 9 acres, all paid for,
Wow.
about 8,000 square feet of building. And so there's a lot of potential. But it was almost like a restart. The previous pastor passed away in 2011, and he was an older man. And so in his last years, the church started to dwindle just for kind of natural reasons. And then
Right.
the church was without a pastor for about 2 years. And that's when the Lord called us to come to the area. And so the church really dwindled down. So in a sense, we weren't starting a church, but it was almost like a restart.
Sure.
Now we didn't have to face the same struggles, and especially in areas like ours in California, it's very difficult, and renting property and just the expense of it. And so I'm thankful we didn't have to go through that part of starting a church, and
Sure.
whether it's at a school or an office space or storefront. And my hat's off to those men who do that. I was, with some men that I was talking to yesterday, they were kind of going around talking about how much do you pay for a lease? How much do you pay for rent and whatnot? And they kind of looked at me and just kind of laughed. And I'm like, obviously I don't get any credit for that. The Lord is the one who used that church for all those years. But I think it helped me going to a place where, we had to start a soul winning program, and there were no kids when we came. There was one teenager, and getting, nursery going and getting children's program going. I always joke about with our people. I was praying through our Sunday school building one day, and I think it was a Wednesday night, and I was praying through the classrooms, and they weren't used on Sunday mornings. It was our first year, and I was just praying, Lord, help these rooms one day to be filled with junior churches and Sunday school classes. And I went to the nursery and said, God, I pray that one day this, nursery would have young people in it that we can, raise this next generation for the Lord. And that night, in the middle of the night, my wife woke me up and told me we were expecting. And I always kind of caution our people, hey, you never know how God's going to answer those prayers. But I was thankful in the sense that God put us in a place where, and I don't know the right way to say this, but I kind of we had to earn our stripes, and
Sure.
we didn't just walk into something that was just a perfectly flowing mechanism.
Sure.
And just a wonderful group of people that welcomed us with open arms, and really they never made us feel like, oh, you're just a kid and you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, they gave me respect that I didn't feel like I deserve, obviously because of the position more than anything, but was very thankful of those things the Lord allowed us, just to kind of be a help and an encouragement to us in those couple of years.
Right.
So there were some difficulties, but like I said, I think in the end of the day, it was more just the difficulty of myself just learning how to shepherd people and how to really be a pastor. And I tell our people, I say, listen, I don't want to just be known as somebody who can preach a sermon. I want to be your pastor. I want to be somebody that is there for your family, someone that is serving in our ministries. Because as God uses me in that area, he'll only use me and whoever more in the pulpit.
Right.
Because that that bonds people's hearts to whoever it is that's up there that's preaching to them. And
Sure.
so, it's been fun. It's been exciting, but,
Yeah.
we're obviously still learning this and, still trying to grow, but hopefully have a couple more things figured out than when we first started. So
Sure. Sure. 5 years down the road. And it's amazing going around, I feel like, almost like on a racetrack, because you have so many similar events throughout the year and things. And we're going around. This August is our 5th year here as well. And so you feel like
nice.
you're hitting the straightaway again on this summer, and all these camps and the crazy schedule, and you're running into it full bore, and you feel like you have your legs under you a whole lot more than you did 5 years ago, or even 4 years ago. And I can only imagine 10, 20 years down the road how that will even change and morph, and the experience and things. But you had some interesting dynamics going into this church merge, now, and even more so working with family and all those different types of things. Before we get into that, what was it like? 'Cause did you say you grew up at Regency? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so what was it like growing up there under Pastor Nichols, and maybe going to the backstory if you go, comic book Stephen Becker episode, comic book, number one, or the origin story. What does that look like for you?
So right before I was born is when my grandparents walked into the church that my father-in-law, Pastor Nichols, pastored in Jackson, which is
Right.
about an hour plus from here.
Wow.
And they were saved, but that was about it. Had no real Bible convictions or standards in that sense. And that's kind of a funny story in of itself. But they heard the preaching, got locked in, and God used that to, with our family that was in this area, start going to Regency, which was started by another man. And so by the time I was born, our family was in church. I think it was the year before I was born that my father-in-law led my dad to Christ. And Pastor Nichols came to this church when I was 5. Mrs. Nichols was my kindergarten teacher, so grew up in the school all my life. Never, went to public school or anything like that. So grew up at Regency Baptist Academy and grew up through the church. And of course went to college and then went to this church. And kind of bringing together what it is now. I knew God called me to the ministry at 16, didn't know what it was.
Right.
Pastor Nichols was the one who called me and said, there's a church that's looking for a pastor, and want you to pray about it, which I asked him, are you sure? And so he helped us through that. And his health has had struggles throughout the years, which God has used that really as a testimony in his music and even his preaching and things of that nature. And a lot of people know that about pastor, and it's one of those things you know about it, but unless you're with somebody, you never really know
Right.
kind of what they go through. And it was always kind of a question, when would Pastor Nichols step down? What's going to happen with his health? And he is my hero in that regard. I have nobody else that I can look to and say, and everybody goes through different things, and but God's used him greatly in my life just to be an example in that regard of, no matter what life brings and no matter what circumstances come, I'm going to be faithful to what God's called me to do. And, you think of Job, people joke about, he's a modern day Job, and, Job's wife turned on him, and, as a pastor, people turned on him through his ministry, but he stayed faithful. And so last year when he came to me and said, hey, I know the Lord's called me, to step down, to resign. And there was actually another pastor in place, and I won't go through kind of those details just for the sake of, the church and whatnot, but that didn't work out. And so it was kind of back to square one. And he's like, okay, Lord, who's going to be the one to, take my place and to keep Regency going? And so that's when he came to me, and, we prayed about that heavily for a couple of weeks and brought that to the church. And that was about a 6-month period until it became official. So that's kind of the short end of it, but
very cool. And that's a heavy, bad enough, stepping in the pastorate at 21 years old, and then stepping into, one of your heroes, your father-in-law's shoes, not that much after, 5.5 years after. What were some of the biggest, maybe preconceptions you had about a church merger that maybe haven't come true or have, or just things because it's not something you see happen all the time, but I know of enough of them. What are some things that, you'd pass along to, and I know you're 6 months into it. It's not like you're way down the road and have seen all the good things and all the fallout from that. But what are some things you'd pass along about that?
So funny enough, I had a chance to intern in Illinois for my wife's uncle, Pastor, my junior year in college, and their church was going through a merge at the time.
Okay.
Now it was a totally different kind of just the way it was going out, but there was
Sure.
a church that they didn't have a building, they didn't have much. It was about 50 people, and kind of a similar thing in the sense that their pastor had health issues, and so it was more of just them welcoming people onto their property and into their church.
Right.
So it was a little bit backwards in the sense that we were the smaller church,
Sure.
and we were merging with the church that had the Christian school and
Right.
several bus routes and staff and things like that. But I thought it was interesting that the Lord allowed me to be a part of that church merge for a summer. And Pastor Hemphill talked to me a little bit and said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some things, and more so because you're here to learn and, to train for the ministry. And he said, I don't know if you'll ever use this one day. And so I kind of laughed now looking back at that, thinking, well, the Lord obviously knew where, I needed to be. And I'm thankful, for that time, because I never had the experience, obviously, of being a staff member. And so that summer is really my only experience, directly serving under a pastor. And so, often I tell him, thank you for that. And he's come to preach to our church, whatnot as well. But it is very different. You don't see it very often. And, with a church, we're not a business, we're a family, and churches, get tight knit and close. And, obviously every church is supposed to be biblical, but every church has their kind of different flair. And, whether it's scheduling or just kind of the spirit, based maybe on the pastor's personality. And so that's always going to be a struggle. You think about in marriage, a husband and a wife, have different likes and dislikes. And, that it's very similar, I think, with a church, just kind of even going through this, there's just a difference in just the maybe culture of the churches. But it was a little more seamless because of obviously the fact that the church was familiar with us,
Right.
And we were familiar with much of the church. And because they were close, we went to some of their stuff if they had revival meetings or vacation Bible school. If we, schedule wise, we're able to go there for a night if we didn't have anything going on. And I tried to be careful about that, especially in the early years. I wanted our heart to get knit to the church that we were at. But obviously being gone that long, from when I graduated high school in 2009 to when I became the pastor in 2019, that's 10 years,
Right.
So there's an influx of people that left since the time I was in the church there, and a lot of people that are there now that weren't there. And so in that sense, it's really a very different church. And churches go through those kind of cycles. So it's not like I was stepping into a place because I grew up there that, well, everyone saw him grow up and everyone, and you were his
Right.
teacher here, but there were some of that.
Right.
And I believe obviously the Lord used that time being away for 10 years to help with that. But, people have asked us and, ask, how's it going and whatnot. And, when you hear that, I think, and just based on the tone of how people ask, how's it going? A lot of times it's kind of like a cautionary, how's it going? Is it okay?
Right.
And
Right.
I just tell people, of course there's some struggles just like anything, but overall it's been very overwhelming, really just how
Amen.
excited, how supported, but how our people have just realized that this isn't just something we're trying to do. And this isn't just something we thought was fun. This is something that was heavily soaked in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
and something that, isn't a preacher's will or a man's will, but it's God's will.
Right.
And I could tell you stories, even stuff that just happened a couple weeks ago, of things that God did that he didn't really have to do, but things that he did just to prove that, wow, if we didn't do this, we would have faced this battle, or this would have happened, or that would have happened. And so God has shown his protection, and he's confirmed it, that, hey, I'm in this, and I'm taking care of you. And God's just done one thing after another. And so it's been exciting for me, because I've been able to go to the pulpit and say, hey, let me share with you something that just took place, or, a prayer that God answered. And you can just see, the people's face, just, like, wow, God's
Right.
in this.
Right.
And I've tried to show that to our people over and over as much as I can through this. And that's really been the overall thing that's helped. And, obviously, you'll have some that aren't as excited as others, and, whatnot, but, our church has been just incredible through this. And, as long as we're still seeing people saved and baptized, and, as long as the Bible's being preached and we're doing what we're called to do, that's going to keep a church healthy.
Right.
In no means were we going to take a step back and say, okay, let's just, kind of figure this out right now. And there's a lot of things that we had to figure out, and we're still figuring out.
Sure.
But in the end, it's okay. Let's figure these things out, but keep doing the main thing. And, so it's been very humbling just to have that. And I've never had staff before. And so now to have, several staff members, whether it's in our school or in our church, and that's been a little bit of a learning curve. But, a big part of that too is that a lot of our staff is family.
Right.
My two brother-in-laws, AJ and Justin, and their wives, my brother-in-law, Tyler, and his wife, my sister, who were, he was my youth pastor when I came to the Youth Group of Regency all the way through high school. And so that was very odd. So I'm pastoring my former youth pastor, my parents. I don't know if I say like I'm pastoring my father-in-law, he's, serving as an evangelist now, but just in the roles maybe. So
right.
It is very overwhelming, and I could never, I could have never orchestrated, the way that God worked this out over the last year. So I guess in short, it's hard to know what to expect, because it is very different.
Right.
But in the end, God has used this to really just build our faith, and more than ever, just to confirm God's in control. As we follow him, he'll work all these pieces out. So it's been, not to use the wrong word, but it's been a fun experience.
Sure.
Serving the Lord is fun, but just to see him orchestrate through that. So.
Absolutely. I love the little application you made there with everything that was going on, and how easy it would have been to, just let's slow everything down. Let's take it at a more sedate pace, and, let's slow some of these ministry things down to kind of wrap our heads around. I'm a fan of the phrase, something like ride the whirlwind. If it's already a tornado, just throw a saddle on it. Let's go to town. Because if things are already moving, what's one more thing, one more moving part? It's just one more wrench in the air, one more ball in the air. We're just juggling here. I think a lot of times, you see that excuse from church members and ministry folks as well. But either going through a tough time, going through a big change, life change, marriage, job, something like that, we're gonna have to take a step back from church for right now. We're gonna be Sunday morning Christians for a little while here. No, when you become Sunday morning only Christians, you become no church at all Christians, is what happens. Mm-hmm. You can't just put the pedal to the metal, put it to the floor and truck on down the road. So I like that application there. So kind of background for you and maybe other folks that haven't no one's seen one of these podcasts in a while, because I haven't done one. But for those of you that aren't aware, I kind of started this interview, conversational, long form type thing to talk to guys, number one, that I would have liked to talk to anyway. There's a lot of guys, including yourself, that I'd like to have a 30-minute, hour-long conversation, but there's not a good excuse sometimes to call. Just call someone out of the blue. If you don't have a good reason, I just wanted to chit chat. Well, this kind of gives me the reason.
Sure.
But and also to ask, questions and learn from people that have gone through things and done things that I haven't. So that's prefacing my next question, working with family. Because I could see in my life, if the Lord allows me to pastor someday, praise the Lord, my brothers and my in-laws, they're all serving God. I could see an eventuality where I'm either serving with, under, or, over my family. And so at risk of, getting into family drama or anything like that. But in all seriousness, how has that been, that adjustment going from being part of the family to being, you know what I'm saying, but
Sure,
almost
sure.
a patriarch type figure? You're the pastor now. How has
Sure.
that been?
It is challenging. I definitely wouldn't say it's for everybody. I think
Sure.
I think of a few that it works with. I think of Stephen Russ, who was my bus captain. He's now
Mm-hmm.
pastoring his home church. That they have 4 generations in their family that are there.
Right.
His grandpa, who was a pastor, and his dad, who is in charge of faith music, and then now, of course, he's the pastor, and his kids are in the church. And I heard him make this statement, and I've never talked to him about it, but he said, we serve with our family, and every Sunday there's 4 generations there. And he said, some days are fun, some days are interesting. I think he said at a youth conference last year, and I kind of laughed because that's right after Pastor came to me about this, Pastor Nichols, and we started praying about it. And I thought, yeah, it's going to be interesting because we'll have, a few generations of family in the church now. But I would say this, if God is in it, and that it's God's will, it can also be an incredible strength too. I never have to question, and our other staff are great too, but
Right.
and I grew up with AJ and Justin as well. AJ is now our youth pastor, and Justin serves in the school and as an assistant pastor as well. But I don't have to question where their heart is, where their loyalty is. We just got a text from them. They were at youth conference this week,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just asking, hey, how are the teens? How's it going? And anyways, his wife texted us and just said, thank you for sending us. We had a great time, and just we've said it many times, but it's such a great thing to serve with family.
Right.
And over and over, we've kind of seen that it's challenging in the sense that you're family,
Right.
and our guys are great, and even my parents, and my in-laws as well. So there's going to be some challenges, and they can come in many different faces. It's always harder to talk about certain things with family.
Sure.
You think about it, when you're out soul winning, or when you're even just serving in ministry and whatnot, and you have to have a conversation with somebody in the church or out, it's a little easier. But if you have to call up, a sibling, or, mom or dad or whoever, and you have to have a hard conversation, it feels 10 times harder.
Sure.
And so, there's challenges with that. But like I said, if God is in it, it can be, an incredible strength. And sometimes in Baptist circles, and I don't know the reason why, but there's big families in churches, and they're all kind of intertwined, especially when certain
Right.
ones get married and whatnot. And our church was like that. My family, we were a pretty big family in the church, and then pastor's family. And so when me and my wife married, that kind of joined 2 big families in the church together. Right. So it's kind of even more so now. And so I have a cousin who actually is our contractor, who's heading up our building project right now, and serving with them, and so it's a lot of fun. It really is. But like I said, it creates a lot of strength. There's challenges, but those challenges, they can be multiplied, maybe because now it's ministry on top of family stuff as well. And I'm not a person who I am so anti-confrontational, and I hate having those conversations, but sometimes they're needful. And so
Right.
sometimes it's easier with family just to kind of ignore things and go on, because you don't want to stir the pot or whatever. And again, I'm thankful because I haven't really had to do that at all. And we all need sharpening at times. I need sharpening. Our guys need sharpening. Our ladies need sharpening. But I would say overall, it's been a great strength to our church. That was one of my biggest fears when we came, honestly, was how in the world can I be the pastor of my cousin, who I looked up to. He's my brother's age. How can I be the pastor to my brother-in-law, who we were good friends, and he and Justin were there through my tough times as a teenager or whatever.
Right.
And so, like I said, number one, it has to be as God in it. And if he isn't, it's God's will. It definitely has its challenges, but man, it can be a huge strength as well.
That's awesome. I mean, talking to, as a part of me, is wondering from afar, how is that going to go? Because I knowing you're not, like you said, I never pictured you as a really confrontational type, calling AJ on the carpet for, whatever, and those type of things. I didn't see that happening. And AJ and Justin are, to me, two of the most laid back, laissez-faire, let's do this thing, have fun while doing it type guys. But I had a conversation with him, somewhat recently, but more than a couple of months ago. I think it was before the merger. I think maybe I'd heard rumblings of it or something like that. And we were talking about something, and completely unrelated. We were just talking about how we are glad, and not, just not really even commiserating or whatever, but just glad that he and I, that we are both still going the same direction. Things we have learned, we're doing our best to pass them along. And I think those of you that are watching, if you know anything about what I'm talking about, you know what I'm insinuating by going the same direction. And we're going the same direction as we were before we came to college, what we learned at Golden State Baptist College, and what we're, what our, Brother Nichols and my heroes passed along to me. And in talking about that, not that it kept me up at night, but in thinking, how is that going to go? And things, I was thinking they're going to be all right, because AJ's going the same direction, Justin's going the same direction, you're going the same direction. And I can't speak for everybody in your church, but when all the main figures are going the same direction, you're going to end up at the same destination normally.
Yeah.
And so you don't have those issues. Yeah. Are there going to be bumps along the road and friction? And, if we're using the road trip analogy, yeah, you can get frustrated with your road trip buddies at some point, but still you're going to end up at the same place. And so that's great to see. Had a comment. One of the cool things about doing this live is, people being able to comment in. Andrew Montgomery, a classmate of ours from back in the day, he said, "Stephen Becker, what a blessing to hear from someone else who's pastoring their home church. It's indeed weird to become your youth pastor's pastor." And so we can imagine how odd that can be, but I'm glad that he's doing good work as well. But so we talked about your origin story, coming to where you're at now, merging and those type of things. Again, I get to ask these questions. I'm, the host, so I get to ask the questions I want to ask. How is it being? I don't know how musical or musically, leaning you are, but how is it being a pastor in a position where there's a whole bunch of musical people around you, and you're trying to set the tone? And maybe you've only experienced this maybe so much in the last 6 months or so, because I don't know how it was at Loomis, but in setting the tone with all these people that are kind of, they already, they have a way that they do things. How has that been?
So I think our people knew off the bat, I am not Pastor Nichols. I don't write songs. I don't, play instruments. I mean, I, had lessons growing up and stuff, but nothing that turned into anything. And, I'll sing in a group or whatever, but, I think that was one thing that they knew off the bat, but, it hasn't really been, a struggle or anything. I don't know if that's even the word to use. It's not like Pastor, Nichols even sang in church much. He kind of told me, he said, I don't want to sing all the time in our church. And I don't really want our family to sing all the time in our church, because, that can kind of kill the, just the spirit of it, if every week, it's, the same people singing. And so, growing up even, it was very rare that Pastor Nichols would sing. Every now and then he would get up and, their family would sing maybe a new song that he wrote or whatnot. In fact, just this last week on Father's Day, I had him get up and he sang a song that he wrote. I think he said that he sang it to his church before this one time. And so, he didn't really push that. So you didn't really see that on a
Right.
day-to-day basis in the church to begin with. You just kind of knew about it. And they had their CDs and whatnot, but they're still doing that. And my wife is a part of that, and they're excited whenever they get a chance to record. And they obviously did their kids CD. I guess it was last year.
Right.
So
That's
hasn't really been a big deal, but
sure. Sure. No, it's cool to be, and I feel like, I mean, that's one of those little things that I hope people pick up on, the wisdom of Pastor Nichols in making that decision to not, because that's a really easy way to make, instead of it being Regency Baptist Church, make it the Nichols Baptist Church. And other people feel like, well, I don't sing as good as the Nichols, so why should I get up there? Well, we all have different talents, different abilities,
yeah,
and so I mean, that's wise. Get other people involved, and don't make it run by you constantly. So I think that was a very
yeah,
wise thing. So,
yeah.
well, very cool. The uh, you said you have a building project that you're going on right now.
Yeah, so we decided that Emerge wasn't enough drama for a church for a year, so we started a building project as well. That
Nice.
was more just we knew the first question was which property are we going to be,
Mm-hmm.
are we going to have our church at? And so that was really the first kind of prayer request in this whole thing. And obviously we're in Loomis now, and the square footage is really about the same as what Regency had in Orangevale. You're adding our folks in Loomis, which wasn't as big as Regency, but still is, some people. But the layout of the property is very different. Over years, you slowly build to what you need, or you
Right.
just work with what you have, and you kind of figure stuff out. It's usually not overnight that boom, you got to figure out how to
Right.
accommodate for different classes and all together. And so we really began a major building project on our auditorium. And I mean, front to end of the whole building, it's changing from kitchen and bathrooms on one side all the way to the auditorium. And so we're still in the planning stages of that. Hopefully we'll be submitting the plan soon. We just got them finalized. I guess it was last week. So that's a learning curve as well, as far as, having that hat. And I'm
Right.
thankful for the people that are skilled in that profession, and, that I can lean on just kind of their expertise in that as well.
Right.
But that was more just to accommodate for kind of what we needed. And we can fit with what we have now. We are. It's full, which is awesome.
Right.
Who doesn't like being in a church? And it's, maybe for a visitor that comes in, I'm always weary of, I don't want visitors to feel like this church doesn't have a place for me.
Right.
But, on the other side, are people looking around and going, man, something's happening. It's not, we had a man come to our church the first year that I became the pastor, and he was a police officer in our area. And I gave him a tract at the local Rayleighs, and he came to church that Sunday, and we had a pretty low crowd that morning. And I remember him kind of looking around, and, he made a statement. He was like, I kind of feel like the oddball in the room here, so it can feel like that sometimes,
Right.
when, there's all this space. And so, but we needed to expand a little bit just so that we're not at a place where it's like, well, we just want to maintain, we want to always push for growth. And obviously the Lord's in charge of that. Jesus said, I'll build my church, so that's not our job. Our job is to serve him and do what we're called to do. But, we want to have the potential to be able to grow our Sunday school classes and our bus ministry and our drive-in crowd. And so we knew, okay, if we come to Loomis, that entails a building project.
Right.
So, again, as long as the Lord is in it, he'll take care of it. And it's been shown many times over. And so because of that, we have the other property in the market right now. And so that'll help with obviously the cost of that and whatnot. But
Right. That's awesome. Very cool. Well, I appreciate the time that you take into. It was probably kind of out of the blue for, again, at the beginning, those of you that just joined us. I wouldn't imagine there's probably too many folks that don't know one or the other of us that might be watching. But and if you probably know one of us, you'd probably know of the other from going to college, Golden State, and things like that. But answering my text, out of the blue. Hey, you want to be on my podcast? I appreciate you taking the time. And like I would honestly say about every single one of these that I've done, it was a blessing to have you take the time and learning little things and picking up tips and tricks and just things that adding to the toolbox, things that I may never use, but you open the drawer and you can see all the tools and know they're there. But one of the last questions I always ask, and this can be spiritual, it can be carnal, it can be whichever direction you want to take it, but anything you just need to get off your chest, just in general, about anything at all. Now that we're speaking to, probably hundreds of thousands of people here on Facebook, anything you need to get off your chest.
I don't know about that, but I did appreciate what you said before, as far as, AJ did tell me when he talked to you and said, hey, Micah's, doing good, man. He's, going the right direction and all that. And I would say that it's very encouraging. I personally don't enjoy, pondering on all those, maybe that have changed.
Sure.
And, we're supposed to change, but we're supposed to change to be more like God.
Right.
We're not supposed to try to change who God is and what he wants.
Right.
And, in the world in which we live, we see a lot of change, and,
Mm-hmm.
So many have adapted to that change. And so I'm very thankful for those who have, stayed the course, stayed the path, for those like you and, Brother Montgomery, Pastor Montgomery, his brother too. And those as well. I was talking to, texting David Russ a couple weeks ago before youth conference, just saying, hey, praying for you, encouraged by you, thanks for staying straight. Thanks for, just, not changing. And
Right.
One of the biggest helps to me when I first came was Pastor Truber came to Regency to preach, and it was a Monday or Tuesday night. And so we went there, and Pastor Harrison came with him, which I believe was his roommate in college. And he preached at the college a couple of times. And before the service, he was sitting by himself. We got there pretty early. And so I went over to him and just said, hey, is there any general out of the blue advice that you'd give to a young man getting into the pastorate? And he just, immediately without hesitation just said, just don't change. You've been taught under a man of God, Pastor Truber, and I'm so thankful for him and Golden State. And he said, what God has given you, don't change it in what you think, this can be better. This can work more. Because it is very frustrating. And again, I don't like to dwell on that,
Sure.
as maybe people decide that, if they're not in my life, in our church, if they're from afar, whether it's on social media or whatever, I'm not wanting to fill my life with their drama and all them. And,
Right.
Sometimes it's, hey, did you see this person? Did you see that? And I'm like, what's that going to do for me?
Right.
Now, if they're in my church or in my family or a part of my life, someone I, I'm yoked up with, you will, then yeah, that does affect maybe my life. But, again, maybe there's more than not. But I'd like to think there are a lot of people out there, like yourself, Brother Russ, Pastor Montgomery, that are doing right, that are doing good. And none of us have it all figured out, but I think that's a good place to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then you got to look to God and say, okay, Lord, I'm not Moses. How are you going to use a Joshua like me?
Right.
And, we serve the same God. And so just thankful for that. And I would encourage anybody listening, not to give into the pressure, not just of the world, but of Christians that are trying to change who God is and, what he wants for our society. Who knows if, how much we're living in the last days, but, I hope that whenever the trumpet sounds, that when the end of the story is written on my life, that it'd be said of me for my kids and those that were able to influence that, he wasn't a perfect man and he had his flaws, but, he stuck to the Bible way, didn't compromise. He didn't give into pressure. My life verse is Psalm 19:14, let the words of my mouth, the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, not in the pastor and church across the street or, on the other side of the country or that person I went to college with, but in thy sight. And I just, hope that, God continues to do a work. It gets very bleak sometimes when you look out, but, there's always a remnant, throughout Scripture.
Right.
God, for some reason, doesn't want to use the majority. And wouldn't it be nice if if we had scores of people around us and thousands around us that we're in the same thing, but usually it's just a remnant. And so, anyways, I just was thinking about that as you said it, and again, I'm very thankful for those who have taken what was passed down. When I graduated, what year did you graduate?
Let's see,
From Golden State.
13, I think.
Okay, so you did. Okay, so that was the
Yeah.
year I graduated. So we got the baton.
Yes. Yeah.
So I have that in my office, and I think of that often. This baton was passed down to me from somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and I can either drop it, I can take it to a place that it's not supposed to be, or I can pass it on the way that it was passed on to me.
Amen.
And so that's something that
Amen.
really, so.
Amen. Well, and I'll tag that with this. It blessing talking to guys like you, AJ, and others, especially those that have those really well-defined heroes and the relationship fathers and uncles and all those guys that are that. Because I see so often, man, it irks me when the older generation changes because their sons and daughters change. That bothers me when they change, and then I don't know if because they think it's my son, he couldn't do anything wrong, he must be right, so we got to go that direction. But Pastor Nichols doesn't strike me as one that it wouldn't matter what you did, AJ did, he's still doing what he's going to do and do right. But man, it makes it so much easier when AJ, Justin, you, Alicia, all those folks are doing right. It makes it so much easier. When the Joshuas aren't going off and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It definitely helps. So I appreciate that. Well, this has been, I think we're sitting on, let me see here, 52 minutes or so. That's not too bad. I appreciate the time very much so. Yeah. It's been Micah McCurry Live number 30. You can find previous podcasts here on Facebook, YouTube, all that different type of stuff. Maybe we'll have to get AJ on here one of these times and talk to him. I don't know what we'll talk about. But we'll have a good time with it. But I really do appreciate, number one, the stand you're taking, what you're doing, but you taking the time to talk with us a little bit. And I hope some of you that are listening, you'll take just one small thing from what was said. I didn't really say anything too wise, but Stephen did. So take something that good from him and listen and apply it to your life. Some familiar names I'm seeing that joined the live stream. So I appreciate all you guys that listened. If you'll stick around for just a second, Stephen, I'll go ahead and sign off here. Micah McCurry Live number 30 with Stephen Becker. Stick around for the next one at some point in the near future. I don't know who the guest is yet, but you'll find out when I find out, all right? We'll talk to you.